So we will have Afshin and Marta talking to us about JupyterLab 4. We're setting up the laptop. I think it took about 13 years to go from IPython 0 to IPython 1.0, and only a couple of years to go to JupyterLab 4. With plenty of new features, and as we've seen in other talks, Notebook 7, which is coming out and is using the JupyterLab 4 component. I'm guessing that's going to be part of your talk. Okay, thank you very much. Big round of applause.
Welcome to the talk on what's new in JupyterLab. I'm Martha Cryan, and this is Afshin Darian. And we are JupyterLab core contributors. Today we're going to talk about the newest version of JupyterLab 4. We had to pick a handful of features out of many in this release, and we had to pick things from across the board. So some are major, like real-time collaboration, and some are smaller. We also worked a lot on accessibility, and we still have progress to make there. I'm going to be talking about some of the new features in core JupyterLab, and Darian's going to be talking about more improvements that were added that might be less obvious to the user or might come as an extension or an extension point. So you might be used to using JupyterLab in the browser, but we're actually going to be using JupyterLab Desktop today. If you aren't already aware of JupyterLab Desktop, some of the benefits of using JupyterLab Desktop are it's very easy installation for Mac, Windows, and Linux operating systems. So you don't need any environment setup or Python. So this is going to be a lot easier for newer users. And then also just double-clicking a notebook from your file browser and being able to just open JupyterLab from there. So with that, I'm going to show that feature off. And it just opened that notebook right out of the file browser. Yeah, so the first feature that we wanted to show off was the notification system. And this is so new that we don't have a lot of core features using this, but we added a little bit of an example to show that you can show status, you can go to this notification center and delete notifications as well as hide them and then revisit them later. So that's going to be something that extensions can also take advantage of, so you can expect to see that both in core and with extensions going forward. We also added a really exciting feature to the notebook editor. It's called the cell toolbar, and it's right here. You can see that I can move a cell and both add a new cell below or above the current cell, duplicate, and delete cells. But on top of these features, this is going to be another extension point that extension authors can add into this functionality, new ways to interact with notebook cells. We've also been working on the search capabilities in notebooks. So as you might know, notebook searching is sometimes more complex than it would seem, with the different kinds of outputs and the different kinds of cells. Filtering and different kinds of searching are really helpful. So let's say I search for X. I might just want to search in my one cell, even though that's coming up in a lot of different cells in the notebook, and we added that feature to be able to search. We also have a lot of different kinds of outputs, and you might or might not want to search within that. So if I'm searching, for example, error, I might have these two cells that talk about errors. But if I also wanted to include this output, I can now control that. Another feature that we added into the notebook editor is this ability to collapse different sections of your notebook based on markdown headers. This is going to be helpful for users both to navigate and organize their notebooks, as well as to kind of control what part of their notebook they're looking at. And on the same note of organizing, we've been working on the table of contents. You can see I added a little time sleep because this is a fast-running notebook, but if this was a slower-running notebook, it might be really helpful to be able to see which section has a running cell. So if I run all cells, you can see that it's kind of showing where I'm at in terms of the cells that are running, and that could be really useful for a user using a really long notebook, or if they want to find which cell is running. We've also been working on this side panel that shows the different running kernels. So a feature that already existed was adding in a new console for a given notebook kernel. But if I open a new console, we now can actually add in a new notebook for that kernel. And in addition, we just kind of refactored this to be more easily digestible and easy to organize. And then we've also added in this settings editor. You'll immediately see that there's a list of modified settings so that it's easier to find your settings that you've changed already. And then it also has a search that's a little bit more advanced. So if I wanted to find the file browser settings, I could just search file. But if I wanted to find this show hidden files setting, I can search for hidden, and it'll just show me that one. So it's a lot easier to both discover settings and find them. And then if I actually click that, it immediately propagates to the rest of the application, and you can see these hidden files in the file browser now. And you can also see that this setting was modified. You can see what the default value is, as well as use this button to restore to defaults. So it immediately restored that setting back to the defaults. Yeah, so those are the core features that we wanted to show off about this release, but Darian's going to go through some of the other improvements that might not be as obvious, as well as new extension points that might allow extension authors to create really special new experiences. So.
Cool. Thanks, Martha. Thanks, Martha. So you may have noticed switching back and forth between the slides and the application. This is because we thought, in case somebody downloads the slides in the future, we've embedded videos of all of these features, so you don't have to install to see what we were talking about. And also, we wanted to make our talk demo-proof. This one, though, I do have to show a video, because what you're seeing in this video is actually one of the performance enhancements of JupyterLab 4 versus JupyterLab 3.6. So I think the video speaks for itself, but it's a minute long, so I'll speak as well. But let's take a gander for a second. So this is a very large notebook, and we're loading it in 3.6, which is happening. And we also loaded it in 4.0, a release candidate, which you can install right now if you don't feel like waiting for this to finish. There it is. And so there are a lot of performance enhancements in JupyterLab. You can clap, thank you. But what you're specifically seeing here is two major refactors that went into the notebook. One is that if you have a very large notebook, you can only show a very small part of it on the screen. So we're now only rendering a small part of the notebook on your screen, and as you scroll, we render what comes into view. Now this is really easy to say. It's really difficult to do because you still have to be able to search. And if a thing is not on the screen, then searching becomes a different problem than it used to be. The other major enhancement you're seeing here is changing the text editor of JupyterLab to be CodeMirror version 6, which is a complete rewrite from CodeMirror version 5. And what CodeMirror 6 brings to the table is a lot of things. Among them, it's much more performant. And these changes propagate down also to Jupyter Notebook version 7. So we wanted to make sure that as we fix a lot of these problems, we're not just doing them in JupyterLab. Jupyter Notebook 7, if you didn't see the talk, we recommend you do when it's posted, is built on the same components that JupyterLab is, and it benefits from these performance enhancements. So the extension manager existed in earlier versions of JupyterLab, but what's different about it now is it no longer relies on the Node.js and NPM ecosystem. As you might know, JupyterLab extensions primarily are front-end things because JupyterLab runs in a browser. And even JupyterLab Desktop, it uses all the same code as JupyterLab. We're running JupyterLab 4 RC1, I think, here. And it is the same code base as what would run in your browser. So when you want to show something in a browser, you're going to primarily be using JavaScript. And it was a natural place for the JupyterLab extensions to reside on NPM for a long time. But it's also quite difficult and slow. We used to have to recompile the entire application to stuff an extension into it. And now you can instead package your extension as a pip package and put it on PyPI, and you can install an extension with pip install, and it'll work in JupyterLab, and it'll work in Notebook 7. And the new extension manager front end, it will use pip to install. So I'm not going to install an extension on the fly because I've been pretty lucky today and I'd like to stay that way, but this is what it looks like. It shows you the installed extensions, and it gives you a little warning the very first time that says the only ones we truly vouch for are the ones that Jupyter releases, but that was always the case. Hopefully you know what you're getting into, and it shows you a whole bunch of other extensions that you can install. This is another thing I can't easily demo, although we discovered something really cool today, which I'll tell you about, but let's first put on the video. So this is two browsers running side by side, doing real-time collaboration. And if you missed the talk earlier today on real-time collaboration, check it out. This is one of the biggest features of JupyterLab 4. And what we've done is we know many people just install Jupyter on their laptops, and they don't necessarily need to have Google Docs for notebooks. But if you do, pip install Jupyter Collaboration, and it just works out of the box. And what you're seeing here is two notebooks side by side, and as edits are made, or rather two browser sessions side by side, and as edits are made in one, they instantly appear in the other, and they get reconciled for whatever differences might be happening. Now, if you come to our weekly JupyterLab calls, you've probably played with earlier versions of these. We've had maybe 20 people on at the same time, and we've had some catastrophic failures, which we've learned from, and we no longer have those. So feel free to try it out. What we discovered today was when we decided to do this talk in JupyterLab Desktop, we actually asked Mehmet, who's in the audience, maybe, yeah, there he is. We asked Mehmet, hey, is this going to work in JupyterLab Desktop as well? And, you know, the intuition was, of course, but we saw it work. It's cool. You can launch Jupyter Notebook and JupyterLab and JupyterLab Desktop, and as long as they're all running on the same server with collaboration mode turned on, you can be inside this desktop application typing, and somebody looking at it in Firefox is going to see the same things. It is pretty magical. Oh, wow, I talked exactly 1:39. Nice. And so one thing that isn't obvious about Jupyter, the new front ends that we're building, Jupyter Notebook, JupyterLab, JupyterLab Desktop, they are built on an extension system. Everything you see on your screen here is an extension that is wrapped in a very thin application shell. And that's how we were able to make a notebook that looks and feels and acts like Notebook version 6, but uses all JupyterLab components, because everything in JupyterLab is an extension. So with this system, and with the APIs, and with the primitives for real-time collaboration, you can build your own application. It can be anything. It can reside inside a JupyterLab session, or it could be its own front end, the way Notebook is, or the way some other application, like Lab itself is. So here is an extension that does CAD inside JupyterLab, and it does real-time collaboration. And this did not take years to build. This took months to build. And this is something that if you told me last year was going to happen so quickly, I wouldn't have believed you. It's wild. You have a brand new file type that we never supported. You have this crazy UI, and then you have 2 sessions where 2 people are simultaneously collaborating on CAD files. And it's all open source, and it's all inside Jupyter, and you can install it. And if you want to talk to the person who built it, I think he's in this room, Trung, yeah, there he is. And yeah, I mean, this blew me away. And so what we have is a lot of APIs that you can hook into, and a lot of features that an application wants where you might not want to write the UI yourself. So Martha showed you the notification system. She showed you the setting editor. Now, the reason why they're listed here as extension points is because you might want to write an extension that notifies your user. You might want to write one that spams your user. Well, you use the notification system to do that. You might have some settings that a user would have had to modify by changing a blob of JSON before. Now it's going to render as a nice form inside the setting editor for free. It just comes with it. You might have an extension that relies on specific metadata within a cell. Now you can give it the metadata for the metadata to render as an actual little form for your users instead of having to build that UI yourself. What you're seeing in this screenshot is the text editor CodeMirror 6 that has been customized by an extension to have the stripes in it, because the text editor itself is an extension point. The tab completion in JupyterLab and Jupyter Notebook is an extension point where you could add things to it that come from a different source than just the kernel if you want. You could add metadata to it so that it tells you what type of thing is being injected into your text. And it is just another extension that you bring in with optional or required dependency injection, and you change it as you want. The table of contents is now an extension point where it's not just for notebooks. You can write a renderer for an entirely different kind of file and have the table of contents API available to you, so that if you have opted into using it, then the table of contents will know how to render itself to reflect what's in your file. And same with the search. Martha showed you search for a notebook, but suppose you're working on a totally different kind of file, and search doesn't exactly have the same semantics because it's not just a blob of text. It's actually broken up into some bits that are binaries, or some bits that are not meant to be searchable, or whatever other constraint you have. Search itself is a thing that you can opt into and extend in the way that makes sense for your application or for your extension. And so I already did a small shout out, but just in case if you missed the Notebook 7 presentation, check it out. Notebook 7 is a really exciting new iteration of Jupyter Notebook that is both meant to keep all of the things we loved about the notebook, the single document interface, the lack of clutter, the one tab per document inside your browser, and the familiar commands, right? Pip install notebook and Jupyter Notebook. All of those work, but JupyterLab extensions work with it. And the code debugger that ships with JupyterLab ships with Jupyter Notebook. And the themes in JupyterLab work in Jupyter Notebook. And so, yeah, check out that talk if you haven't, and upgrade Notebook if you haven't. And if you missed the JupyterLite presentation, it's a really exciting piece of software that takes all of the things that you see on the screen when you run Jupyter and puts them all in the browser. The Python code is executed in the browser. The kernel is right there in JavaScript via WASM. And so you could have a static web server somewhere. And sure, your users are going to have to download a bundle that's somewhat large because it's multiple runtimes. But what you have is just a static HTML, JavaScript, CSS page that is a full environment to teach, to do quick calculations for many, many instances of the reasons why people launch a full Docker image with an operating system and all these other layers just to get Jupyter on the screen. You could actually swap that out for just a static web server and have all the same benefits. In fact, the only times you really don't have that as an option are when you need truly powerful compute. Because even if you're doing something like talking to a foreign API, well, the same way you were going to write that code in your notebook to do that inside, from the server side, from the kernel, you can just do that in your browser now. And it's amazing. So we showed you a lot of things. And we apologize for that Conda install right there because we're in the release candidate phase. But we figure if you use Conda, you've seen this before. But yeah, try it out. Try out the release candidate. JupyterLab 4 will be out within either 1 week or 2. You can pip install it with the --pre flag, or you can install JupyterLab Desktop. Go to the page on GitHub and download it for Mac Silicon, for Intel Macs, for Linux, for Windows. And if you have Conda, it'll figure it out and let you pick your Conda environment. If you don't have Conda, it'll figure it out and it'll just work. It is awesome. Again, here it is. It's cool. And this is how it tells you, you can pick a Conda environment as you wish. It is really slick. It's a nice experience. You can double click on your notebooks. They just work. And people have asked us for that for a long time. How do I get Jupyter on my desktop? So thank you very much. If you are interested in participating more, go to jupyter.org/community. Please come to our meetings. There's a community calendar there. Please show up on the repos or on discourse. We'd love to talk to you. Big thank you to Fred, who actually wrote the half of the talk that I'm giving, and I'm very grateful. Big thank you to Mehmet for JupyterLab Desktop and to Trung for JupyterCAD. And thank you for all the contributors to the pieces of software that we just showed you and to the sponsors. And if we have time, we're happy to take a few questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have sprints. I guess we can come to see you at sprints.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yes.
Just you, or do we have other people that we need to come see at sprints?
To be honest, I've committed to nothing. So.
You just say yes. Okay. So do we have any questions? We have any questions here?
Can you say something about the integration with MathJax? Because MathJax had this same issue about a way to just render part of what was visible. And are you moving into MathJax 3? Are you staying kind of open about MathJax versus KTeX? How's that going?
So we haven't switched away from MathJax to something else, but there is a lot of conversation about upgrading that, and there's also a larger conversation about standardizing Markdown that we render, right? Because there is no one Markdown standard, and that is not something that has been finalized for JupyterLab 4. If possible, what we want to do is to define that spec in a way that doesn't require us waiting until another major version. I'm not sure whether that's possible or not, because it's not something that I've looked into myself that much. But what I can say is MathJax is just one piece of that larger Markdown problem. How do we standardize what's in those Markdown files and what they render so that front ends that we didn't author can give users the same experience when they put Markdown in their cells? So unfortunately, I don't have a much better answer than that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm right here.
Hey.
Just wondering, since this is a major release, what are some of the things that are going to start breaking or being deprecated this release that we have to worry about, or extensions that aren't going to work right out of the box?
So we have an extension migration guide and also an extension migration tool that hopefully will mitigate the pain. Most of your logic shouldn't really change. We haven't changed the APIs all that much. Now, if you are a maintainer of an extension that worked in JupyterLab 3, you will almost certainly need to modify your package.json file to bump the versions, and you might find that a few of your APIs are slightly different. But actually, this wasn't a high churn release, and we have switched to a model where we bump the major version number of individual packages only when necessary. Even if we were releasing JupyterLab 23, if it were the case that JupyterLab application, version 8 was good enough, we will stick with that. So that's not a fully comprehensive answer, but what it means is if you currently maintain a JupyterLab extension, it shouldn't be that painful. If you're upgrading from Notebook 6 to Notebook 7, that's a pretty different story. And we have a few ways that we've tried to mitigate that upgrade path, which is we have a package called MB Classic, which you can install and run Jupyter that way, where you'll have the Notebook 6 UI for a hard dependency on MB extensions. And we also have authored migration guides for people who are ready to move an MB extension to JupyterLab, which is quite a different story. But if you're asking specifically about JupyterLab extensions, it shouldn't be that painful, but you will have to do, at the very least, updating the package.json file. Any other questions?
Down there.
Cool.
First of all, thanks to the entire team for, it's been a long time coming, and it's a wonderful job. My question is about the RTC machinery and the issues. As you recall, I was one of the people who dog-fooded pretty hard on this and ran headfirst into some of the most painful problems. And I was wondering, and we were still seeing up to 363 some weird edge cases that were still happening. Do you think 4 clears those out safely? I'm asking with my Berkeley 1200 students hat on.
So we released JupyterLab 3.6 with collaboration integrated into it. And we made the decision to pull collaboration logic into its own package and to make it opt-in for JupyterLab 4. And we have not encountered any catastrophic failures, and we've tried pretty hard to generate those. Because there was a time where you could actually wipe all of the content of a notebook file. We have a new file ID service that means even if someone maliciously renames the file that 30 people are working on, it still continues working magically. I wouldn't be surprised if there are edge cases, because collaboration is a hard thing for a small team to demo, and it's a hard thing to automate those tests. So what we do is we have weekly calls on Wednesdays, and we ask 20 people to sign on and see what happens, right? I can say that I'm not scared for your data. I can't say that you won't find weirdness. I don't know, do you have any ideas or any thoughts on this? No. Okay, yeah. So I don't know if that's reassuring enough, but your data's safe?
One more question? I may have one. You have one here.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and it was really cool. And my question is not really a question, but I did also try to install JupyterLab Desktop, And I think during the installation, I saw that multiple instances of IPython kernels were also installed. And when I use the normal JupyterLab on browser, it turned out that I have all of a sudden multiple ones. And I'm not sure if it's intentional or something I did wrong, but I also saw that on GitHub that some people also had the same problem. And maybe you had some suggestions for that?
I don't, but I specifically pointed to Mehmet in case this happens. So Mehmet's right there.
Stand up, stand up.
So can we give Mehmet a mic? Maybe he can.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, I don't have a specific answer for yours, for the issue you are having, but I'm happy to troubleshoot that with you. I'm around. Yeah, let's take a look at it together.
Mehmet kindly volunteered to be at the Netflix booth from 1 to 2 p.m. tomorrow to talk specifically about JupyterLab Desktop. I'm not putting him on the spot. He agreed to this.
Thank you very much. Is there any non-code related, non-programming related things we can do to help you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can test out the release candidate by pip install /pre JupyterLab and tell us what's wrong. We're pretty ready, but there might be something.
They like bugs. Thank you. I think we're going to go to the closing remark. Sylvain?
Just one thing. Again, to reiterate, tomorrow, 1 to 2, if you would like to talk with Mehmet, please do. Please do one of these 3 things. Try out JupyterLab, and if anyone's hiring, Martha is awesome. Thank you.